Today we're going to talk about the neuroscience of giving up. I'll see you inside. And for the sake of this discussion, giving up is going to be stopping a behavior due to its perceived outcome. What I think is really interesting about giving up is it's actually an active process. There are mechanisms inside of our brain that actually turn on to make us give up. Specifically, I'm talking about a concept called futility-induced passivity. And this is the concept of giving up on a specific action or behavior when the mind perceives that the effort and investment required to obtain the ultimate outcome is futile and unbeneficial in the long run. And oftentimes, this isn't even giving up on something that you've started in. Sometimes this can come in the form of not starting something in the first place. Passivity is a state of inactivity. So despite maybe wanting to be a professional singer, you are not actively pursuing it because you don't believe that your voice is good enough, so it appears to be a futile engagement. Therefore, it's not worth putting in the effort and investment required to actually go down the path of becoming a professional singer, so you are passive about this goal. And now all of this is a construct of our perception. Additionally, some people simply have psychological hardwiring that allows them to invest much more effort into a given behavior or task before they actually give up. Conversely, others may actually give up much more quickly because they either have a less accurate or more accurate perception of the actual outcome. So if you've ever sat and wondered why someone is actively pursuing a goal that you don't even find desirable, it may be because their perception of the reward is much higher than yours. And as long as they continue to perceive that the reward is worth the investment, they will continue to invest the effort in obtaining it. They may also have a specific emotional or psychological attachment to a reward that you simply do not have. For example, someone who engages with drugs of abuse may continue to put in the effort and time to obtain the drugs because they remember the feeling that they got when they have used it. However, if your only experience with a specific drug is just not enjoying the smell when it is being smoked, then it is not hardwired into your reward circuitry, so you have no motivation to obtain it. And this is how the futility of a reward actually keeps us from engaging in a lot of things during our daily lives. Simply just not even starting. However, it can also be the same reason that we quit. We may actually start something because we believe that the time and energy investment is worth the reward. However, we may soon realize that our initial expectation was not correct, and we no longer feel that the energy required is worth the reward. And the global construct of this would simply just be a cost-benefit analysis. And there are actual brain circuits that underlie this. So this was actually demonstrated in a study on a group of fish. So interestingly, they actually put these fish in a little virtual reality setup. And in the first group, what the fish saw on the virtual reality setup actually corresponded with their motor movements. So if they tried to swim forward, the virtual reality would move forward. However, they took the same fish and actually made it such that the virtual reality would not move despite the fish putting in effort. So they put in the effort to swim forward, but they did not receive the visual feedback that they were moving. And almost immediately, these fish just gave up on the task and stopped swimming altogether. The fish's perception of the investment of energy that they were putting in to move forward seemed futile. And then they looked at the brain of these fish. So through that transition of trying to move forward, realizing that it was futile, and then stopping their motor activity, it seems that most of their brain activity, likely corresponding with motor movements, actually decreased. However, the activity in a specific subset of cells called glial cells actually increased. And they saw this because these glial cells began to get surges of calcium, which will actually cause these cells to activate. And it was specifically in an area of what's called the lateral hindbrain, and it was called the LMO, or the lateral medulla oblongata. And when the researchers did an initial study where they actually stopped these neurons from firing, they found that the fish would continue to swim for much longer than the normal fish. And this kind of indicated that giving up is actually an active psychological inhibition. meaning that there are actual neurochemicals inside of our brain causing us to give up. So it looked like these LMO neurons actually induced transmission of a different neurochemical called GABA, which would make sense because GABA will actually reduce the activity of neurons. It's referred to as an inhibitory neurotransmitter, and it actually allows negative charges into the cell and positive charges out of the cell, and the GABA will actually reduce the voltage of these cells. And the way that cells actually signal to release a neurotransmitter is by surpassing a specific voltage. So this GABA would actually turn off these motor movements of swimming. So now, how was this actually communicated to the brain in the first place? What made the brain think, you know what, this is worthless? It appears what turned off these motor activities was actually an increase in another neurotransmitter called norepinephrine. As the fish continued to put in more effort and continued not to get the reward they were expecting, their norepinephrine levels actually would increase. And this norepinephrine would increase that calcium signal into these glia cells, which would increase the GABA production and then decrease motor activity. And now I feel like there could actually be an explanation for this increase in norepinephrine, but this is strictly my hypothesis. A lot of this data is really new, so there hasn't been much time for follow-up data. However, if we look at the production of noradrenaline, there is an intermediate step of actually creating dopamine. The pathway actually starts with an amino acid called phenylalanine, which is turned into tyrosine, and then L-dopa, then dopamine, and then norepinephrine. So my hypothesis is that because dopamine is correlated with movement and motivation, when the fish began engaging in swimming, they actually produced dopamine. Let me rephrase that. You're always producing dopamine, but I think their dopamine production actually elevated. And when the dopamine would bind to the receptor, it would motivate them to continue swimming. But what we also know is that when a behavior does not produce the reward you are expecting, your dopamine levels will decline. And I'm not quite sure the exact mechanisms, but I presume something about this decline in dopamine left dopamine available to be turned into norepinephrine. So now we have the signal of more noradrenaline being produced to actively cause us to give up. And we also have lower levels of dopamine, which would be a secondary mechanism to actually reduce our motivation. So we're now inhibiting the process of being motivated, and we are actively exciting the process of, for lack of a better word, giving up. Like I said, I'm not exactly sure about the exact mechanisms for dopamine becoming noradrenaline. Simply where this process starts, what dopamine is actually biotransformed into norepinephrine. But I do think it's an interesting concept because, as you may have experienced in your life, sometimes the things that you put in your hardest effort for but end up actually giving up on are the ones that feel the worst. But for now, I'm going to leave this one here. I hope you may have actually learned something today about the neuroscience of giving up, and I hope you come back to listen to the next episode. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.